You want someone else to do the toast?
Don't mind.
What about Daniela? Daniela, do you want to do a toast?
Uh, I think
She might be off away from the
yeah.
camera now.
Any volunteers, or should I just go ahead? Go.
Yeah, it looks good. It looks like we're on YouTube.
Oh, okay. Hi, and welcome everyone to the BiotensegriTea Party. We are an all-volunteer production of the Stephen M. Levin Biotensegrity Archive. And we are thrilled to be here with all of you out there on YouTube and everybody here on Zoom, and to welcome our guest today, Daniel Roy. Now, Daniel is down in Australia. Thank you, Daniel, for getting up at 3 a.m. And he is the author of Leveraging Biotensegrity for Sports Performance and Ecological Dynamics Perspective, and working on his PhD. But Daniel's going to introduce himself to you a bit more when he does his presentation. So first, I would like to let you know that I'm Chris Morita Clancy, coming to you from the unceded territory of the Coast Salish Nation, pretty close to Vancouver, BC, which is today sunny, yippee. And I'm here with my co-host, Susan Lowell de Solorzano. Hi, Susan.
Hey, how are you coming in from Washington, D.C.?
Great to see you there. And Graham Scarr. Hi, Graham.
Hello, Chris. Graham Scarr from sunny Nottingham in the UK.
Well, it's great to see you and everybody here. We love to start our tea parties with a toast. So if you have a glass here, whether it's tea or something stronger, please raise your glass, and I propose a toast to all of you, to the biotensegrity community. We're growing strong and stronger every day, and to new adventures. Cheers.
Yes.
Cheers.
Okay, without further ado, I would invite people who are here on Zoom to turn off your video for now. We'll bring them back on again when we do our Q&A at the end. Susan, are you doing the facilitation with Daniel, or shall I introduce him?
Yeah, I think I can do the Q&A, but why don't you set up for the presentation?
Okay, so Daniel, I know you've got a presentation for us today. Would you please set that up and help us get started?
Sure. Do I just press share and then get my slides going?
Sure, that would be awesome.
Yep. Let's see if I can.
While Daniel's doing that, I will.
Dan, you don't have the sound on your presentation. You're speaking us through it, right?
A bit of both.
Okay, because you want to make, after you click the original share screen button, there's a little share sound thing that needs to be clicked. So you might want to start over if you want us to hear sound on your
Okay. So can you talk me through that one more time?
Okay, so Susan, there we go.
You click the green button once.
Yep.
And then you'll get choices coming up, and look over to the right-hand side of the screen.
Yep.
See if there's something for sharing audio.
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Okay,
and
good.
then make your selection.
All right. Okay, so you can see my screen?
Yeah, we see the thumbnails as well.
Okay, I'll put that. All right.
There we go. Okay, take it away, Daniel. I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. So thanks for the invitation to be part of this episode of the Biotensegrity Tea Party. I have been watching the Tea Party for quite a number of years now, so it's interesting now to be on this side of things and to be able to share what I've been working on over the past several years, really. So yeah, it has been about 7 years, I would say, where I've been studying at Griffith University, which is on the east coast of Australia, and making my way through my exercise science degree, Master of Medical Research, and now I'm into my PhD. And throughout that time, I've been involved in a number of different studies, and some of those which I'll be talking through today. So in my undergraduate degree, I was involved in a research elective study project. Then I will talk about what was involved in my Master of Medical Research project. But the main part will be discussing the theoretical position paper article, which was first developed within the PhD program. And I'll finish off providing a bit of an overview of what follows on from that. So my main area, I'm just going to let this video play in the background. There is no sound, but so my main area of interest, which got me into the whole research side of things, has been my hobby or my passion for Wing Chun Kung Fu, and sort of wanting to better myself, trying to get a better understanding of being able to explain how it is that the senior practitioners within this lineage were able to move in despite of the resistance of a larger training partner or someone even not being compliant with their resistance. And so I was fortunate enough to have an elective as part of my exercise science degree, and I had a Wing Chun practitioner come in, and we performed a replica of this video, which you can find on YouTube if you want to have a closer look. But basically the setup was the Wing Chun practitioner standing on one leg on scales, and these two people are pushing forwards towards him, and the measured change in the scales went from 66 to 100, so an increase of 34 kilos, and they couldn't push him back. In our study, we had force plates rather than just like a bathroom scale type of setup, and that recorded an absolute difference of 533 newtons, which was calculated towards 33 kilos vertically. So similar results there. And again, not able to push him back, and he was not standing in 1 foot. Moving on to the master's program, I wanted to then end up switching the focus to look at striking. So if you follow this website, you can have a bit of a look at that project, which was featured on a local news station. And the lab setup involved, again, we had the force plates. We had a custom designed punching rig where we could measure impact force. We had slow motion capture and EMG. And we were testing the difference between an elite, experienced, and control group based on 3 starting scale distance from the target. And we derived a number of punching effectiveness measures relating to what was happening on the ground and the ratio between that and what was happening in relation to their peak impact force, and found that rate of force production was another key difference between the groups.
Within my PhD program.
So over the next 15 minutes or so, I have done a voiceover presentation. I did want to try to talk it through, but anyway, this is the way it's turned out. So hopefully the audio comes through okay, and someone can let me know if it doesn't, but I will move on.
Within my PhD program, we've now shifted the focus of the research back towards a study of continuous contact point interactions, an area first explored during an undergraduate elective I completed. With additional funds and testing equipment and more time to develop the theoretical framework, we've aimed to build a clearer and deeper understanding of performance within these type of interactions. The PhD is structured in 5 phases. It began with a literature review, which led to the development of a theoretical position paper. This was followed by an expert opinion study, an equipment validation study, a case study, and finishing with an intervention study. I'll touch on these follow-up studies later in the presentation, but to begin, I'll introduce some of the key ideas from the position paper, which was published earlier this year in the Journal of Ecological Psychology, titled Leveraging Biotensegrity for Sports Performance, an Ecological Dynamics Perspective. I'd also like to acknowledge Susan and my supervisors John and Steve, who were co-authors on this paper. Before delving into my initial confusion with biotensegrity, I'd like to introduce a specific task example that I'll be referring back to pretty much throughout the whole rest of the presentation. And this should help at explaining some of the key concepts and methods that follow. The task is simple. Starting from a square-on stance with one hand close to the trunk, the movement involves extending the arm forward, away from the body. However, the task becomes more challenging once there's a training partner to apply resistance to that movement. Now, onto my initial confusion with biotensegrity. When I first began exploring the concept, one of the first things I came across was this table. At the time, I thought it offered a compelling explanation for the capabilities of the more senior practitioners in our lineage of Kung Fu that I was training within, suggesting that they were able to embody the characteristics of a tensegrity structure. For example, things like low energy cost, global force distribution, and omnidirectional stability, or at least that's what I perceived I was feeling and observing. However, these attributes did not seem to be reflected in my own capabilities, especially in tasks like the ones we have described here. And instead, I felt that my movements and my performance was more closely resembled to that of a continuous compression lever system, where force is generated relied more heavily on likewise muscle tension and effort, and the characteristics we see in this table. One of the courses I found most helpful in helping to understand how to improve my skill and move towards a condition that more closely reflected the characteristics of a tensegrity structure was motor learning and control. A concept that really stood out to me in that course was Bernstein's degrees of freedom problem. Degrees of freedom refers to the number of independent variables that define the state of a system. This includes things like joints involved, the angle those joints move through, how different joints might be coupled, and the related muscle activations. Bernstein's degrees of freedom problem highlights the challenge faced by a human motor system and how it manages this vast number of possibilities to produce purposeful and coordinated actions. Bernstein proposed that the solution unfolds across 3 stages in skill acquisition. First, the system simplifies control by rigidly fixing or coupling joints. This helps manage complexity, but it also has the effect of freezing movement options. With continued practice, the athlete gradually releases those constraints, allowing more joints and muscles to participate in a more flexible and coordinated way. And finally, through the further refinement, the athlete learns to exploit their degrees of freedom, leading to greater efficiency, adaptability, and precision of movement. Another topic from motor learning control that I found particularly useful in helping to better understand sports performance was ecological dynamics, which is a transdisciplinary framework that combines principles from ecological psychology and dynamical systems theory. 3 key concepts from ecological psychology include direct perception, affordances, and action perception coupling. Direct perception relates to the idea that information in the environment is rich and structured enough to be perceived directly without needing any internal processing or mental representations. Affordances refer to action possibilities offered by the environment, and they are relative to an individual's capabilities. Action perception coupling describes the ongoing relationship between perception and action. Perception guides action, and action in turn shapes perception. It is a continuous feedback loop where we adjust our movements based on what we perceive, and what we perceive changes as we move. Some key concepts from the dynamical systems theory side include self-organization, nonlinearity, and constraint shaping behavior. Self-organization refers to how movement patterns can emerge spontaneously from the interaction of system components without the need for a central controller. Nonlinearity relates to the changes in coordination that don't always happen gradually. In some instances, even small shifts in conditions, like a change in speed or force, can lead to sudden nonlinear changes in how the body's components work together. Constraint shaping behavior relates to the concept that behavior is not controlled centrally and that is instead shaped by the interaction of constraints. And I will move on to breaking this down further in the following 2 slides. This diagram shows a common conceptual structure used in ecological dynamics and the constraints-led approach. It illustrates how movement behavior emerges through the interaction of individual, task, and environmental constraints. Together, these shape the affordances an athlete perceive. And through this continuous perception-action loop, athletes develop functional coordination patterns suited to the performance context. I'll now briefly explain each category of constraint using examples from a combat sports setting. Environmental constraints. These refer to the external factors in the environment that impact upon behavior. For example, lighting, temperature, the ground surface, or in a combat sports setting, whether it's in a cage, a ring, or just on a mat. Task constraints. These involve the specific features of the task, things like rules, goals, equipment, or the instructions that have been provided. For instance, compare the rule sets in striking-based sports like boxing and kickboxing to predominantly submission-based sports where striking might not be allowed. In the next slide, I'll break down individual constraints into their subcomponents and explain how I see biotensegrity fitting into this model. Individual constraints can be subdivided into 2 categories: structural individual constraints and functional individual constraints. Structural individual constraints refer to relatively stable physical characteristics of the body, such as anatomical or biomechanical features, which tend to change slowly over time. Some examples include body size, muscle mass, and related aspects like strength and power. In contrast, functional individual constraints are more transient or modifiable factors, such as psychological or physiological states that can vary from moment to moment. Examples include focus of attention, intentions, perceptions, and previous movement habits. Where I see biotensegrity fitting into this model is that just as I could, for example, intentionally adapt my functional individual constraints in an attempt to embody the characteristics more reflective to that of a continuous compression lever system, on the flip side, I could also intentionally adapt these same functional individual constraints towards exploiting the affordance of embodying a coordinative structure of tensional integrity. And I think it's pretty clear that both of these approaches would lead to some different outcomes in relation to functional coordination dynamics if practiced over time. One situation I was initially setting out to explain was an example similar to what is depicted here within these figures. How is it that a small and seemingly weaker individual, even if they are a highly skilled Kung Fu practitioner, can they still manage to move their arm forward against the resistance of a larger and stronger opponent? Let's look at example A. In this scenario, if we consider that everything is equal except that the blue individual is larger, has more muscle mass, or both their slow and fast twitch muscle fibers, then in this case, it is difficult to imagine how the green individual could hold on to their position, let alone moving their arm forward. In example B, the blue individual still holds an advantage in size and strength, but this time consider that the green individual has trained and adapted their functional individual constraints, such as their focus of attention, intentions, perceptual attunement, and behavioral tendencies, and in turn, that they're able to better exploit their available degrees of freedom, leading to behaviors that are more reflective of a tensegrity-based system. So in this version, despite the physical mismatch, is this a factor in helping to better understand how the green individual can successfully maintain their structure and move their arm forward in despite of the incoming resistance? This figure is taken from our position paper, but it essentially integrates components from two key sources. The 2013 article by Seifert, Button and Davids on expert movement systems, and the 2016 work by Wilson and Keeley on the multifunctional role of the foot in athletic performance. Our contribution was to highlight how the key properties of degeneracy, metastability, and self-organization can emerge as natural outcomes of maintaining a coordinative structure of tensional integrity, and that it's this combination which helps to support and enhance an individual's movement proficiency. I will define each of these properties and again relate them to the example shown on the bottom right. Self-organization refers to a system's ability to form coordination patterns naturally through the interaction of components without a central controller. In this example, if the person on the right suddenly increases the force or speed of their push, can the person on the left reorganize their system without collapsing or defaulting to a more rigid or isolated response? Metastability. This describes the ability of a system to stabilize temporarily in different coordination patterns, allowing smooth transitions without locking into just one. In our example, as the training partner increases the pressure, can the practitioner on the left continue moving their arm in a circular pattern, maintaining flow without freezing or falling out of balance? Degeneracy. This refers to the ability to achieve the same movement outcome using different configurations. It promotes flexibility and adaptability. For instance, can the person on the left execute the same movement from a blade stance, a squared stance, while stepping, pivoting, or while standing on one leg? Just a quick slide here to summarize what's been suggested. First, to move closer to optimal performance in a continuous contact point interaction, the system needs to embody the mechanical characteristics of a tensegrity structure. Second, achieving this requires the exploitation of the body's degrees of freedom through the adoption of a coordinative structure of tensional integrity. And third, doing so promotes the emergence of key properties such as degeneracy, metastability, and self-organization, which support more adaptable and proficient movements. Now moving on to the importance of understanding key concepts from synergetics in a coach's approach to skill acquisition practices. Synergetics is a framework developed by Herman Hacken that helps explain how self-organized patterns emerge in complex systems. Some key concepts of synergetics include instabilities, bifurcations, enslavement, hysteresis, control parameters, and order parameters. Instabilities refer to moments in time when the system is near a critical threshold, where a small external change can cause a loss of form or control. A bifurcation occurs when the system hits a tipping point that causes it to shift and reorganize into a new coordination pattern. Enslavement describes how different body parts become co-regulated, working together as a coordinated unit. Hysteresis refers to the idea that a system's current state is shaped not just by the present conditions, but also by its recent history. A control parameter is a variable that drives change within the system, while an order parameter captures the system's overall coordination or behavioral pattern. So how do these ideas apply to the task as depicted here below? Well, one goal for the coach might be, in this example, to help the student increase their threshold so they can tolerate more force before instability occurs. And then when a bifurcation does happen, the coach can look to create opportunities for the student to practice reorganizing from a less effective configuration that the breach in the threshold may have caused back towards a more optimal coordinated structure. On the next slide, I will discuss some coaching tools that may help be of use in facilitating this process. There are a number of task manipulations a coach can introduce to make this exercise either more difficult, more easy, or simply just challenging it in a different way. encouraging what is referred to as repetition without repetition. For example, the coach can vary where the contact is applied, whether it's on the upper arm, elbow, or wrist. They can change how much force is applied and in what direction, pushing towards the athlete's center, across towards their opposite shoulder, downward, upward. The coach can also manipulate the speed at which the force is applied, gradually increasing the pressure or applying it more suddenly. Or they might ask the student to perform the task while standing on one leg or combine it with a step or a pivot. In terms of coaching tools that support the student's refinement in how they export their degrees of freedom, options include tactile feedback, shifting their focus of attention, intentionality manipulation, and for some students, even providing a basic understanding of the degrees of freedom problem, biotensegrity, and/or ecological dynamics may be helpful, as it may positively help them shape their ability to perceive their body's potential as an adaptable and intelligent force management system.
Okay, so moving on to what I'm up to now and what I've got left to go. So I finished the theoretical position paper with the expert opinion study that's currently underway. And then we'll be moving on to a equipment validation study and case study and an intervention study. I think I mentioned that before, but anyway, let's move on to find a bit more about each of those. So the expert opinion study will be sending out this focus prompt question based on your experience, the key characteristics associated with expert performance within a continuous contact point interaction include, and at the moment we've had about 49 responders to that survey that went out, and about 180 different insights or comments towards that.
Danielle, can I jump in and ask you a question? Are you looking for more people, for more respondents? Or
yeah, we're kind of at the pointy end. I do need some more people for the sorting and rating part, preferably with more than 6 years of martial arts coaching and or training experience. And but yeah, I sort of need anyone who wants to be involved, you know.
So Daniel, I have got you sent us a letter when you were speaking at Trailblazers.
Yep.
Do you want me to share that here in the Zoom chat, or is it a different letter?
Yeah, no, sure. We've got a week, so I do need a couple more, but yeah, if anyone wants to jump in, yeah, that'd be great if you can put that up, Chris.
Okay, will do.
Thank you. So the phases of this qualitative or sort of mixed method study will be obtaining those brainstorm responses, cleaning them to remove any duplicates or potential answers which do not seem to be a clear response to that focus prompt. And then the participants will receive that data set back, and they will be asked to sort and rate those responses in relation to how important is that to achieve and how difficult is that to achieve. Moving on to the validation study. So within the continuous contact point interaction tasks to come in the case study and the intervention study, we wanted to use a measurement which allowed us to provide a better understanding of what was happening at the muscular level. So rather than just using EMG, which we have done in the past, and sort of getting an idea of what's happening on the contractile CNS stimulated side of things, through the use of myotonometry, we can get a better understanding of also what's happening with the viscoelastic properties. And to do that, we have purchased a myoton unit, and in order to assess its validity and reliability, we are testing it against the current gold standard, which is shear wave elastography for stiffness. And so the myoton unit can be used to characterize muscle tone or state of tension, dynamic stiffness, and another measure to characterize elasticity. And just a quick overview of the project. So basically, like it'd be a strap over a bar attached to a chain. At the end of the chain, there'll be this dynamo, which will measure force, and the participant will perform an isometric tricep contraction at different levels of their maximum voluntary contraction levels. And then we'll be testing both the myotonia and shear wave under those conditions and comparing the differences at the end. With the case study and intervention studies, the setups will be the same. And so we have devised a glove. I don't know what we're going to call it yet, but it's basically like a way to measure pressure at the point of contact, which we've done through the development of sort of like an air wedge, or like you can even just imagine a balloon, which we have a pressure transducer inserted into that. And then we can measure the change in pressure when the research assistant applies their force. How much force can that participant take before they push backwards or their arm collapses in on themselves? And then what other associated characteristics of happening at the muscle level. So the viscoelastic properties, and we will also be using EMG to sort of tease that apart a bit more. And that's the end of the presentation. So I'll stop sharing. All right, I'm back in.
Thanks, Dan. That's fantastic. One of the most exciting things about this work is those of us in the biotensegrity community hear again and again things like, well, so how does this apply in my life? People really want applications, and I know you're working with martial arts, but from the limited understanding that I have, it feels as though what you're talking about, it applies way more than just martial arts, and it's feels like you're opening a doorway for so much that has so much potential. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
And congratulations. So I'm going to hand it over to Susan, and Susan will facilitate the Q&A. Thanks, Susan. Thank you, Daniel.
All right. And thanks anybody who's in the Zoom room with us today. If you have a question, please use the raise hand feature, and then I'll know that you've got a question you want to step up and ask. Daniel, I want to know about pushback. Biotensegrity is still regarded as a somewhat edgy concept. So through your many years in school, now 7 years in school, how has that, what have your experiences been with pushback, if any?
Yeah, I guess initially when I decided that I wanted to pursue, postgraduate research, I did approach lecturers or senior researchers in the field of biomechanics first, and also neurophysiology. But they sort of it wasn't really because they were had differences of opinion around biotensegrity. It was just that they said, if you want to do it, then you got to sort of follow in with what we're doing. So, but anyway, as it turned out in the field of motor learning control, that was a good fit. And then, of course, going through the peer review process, that was quite interesting. I think it took about 7 months. 2 rounds of reviews, which might be normal, but
I want everyone to note that 7 months and 2 rounds of redoing the paper for the peer review process for that paper. So that was an extensive process that I was able to get a peek to the inside of. And Daniel, you handled yourself so beautifully with that. There's peer review, and then there's peer review. And some processes are Well, there's a range of different kinds of journals today and how stringent their peer review processes are. And I think for the Journal of Ecological Psychology, it's highly stringent, which makes for a better paper. Do you agree?
Oh no, I definitely thought a lot of the feedback that I was getting was valuable in terms of ways that I could change it to make it better in the most part. So I remember before the first review, I think the paper was around 7-ish thousand words, and then after the number of reviews of different things that it seemed to be missing or lacking depth, then it's sort of blown out to, I think it finished it at around 12,000 words. So yeah, I know it was definitely an interesting process, and but quite helpful, I thought, as well.
There you go.
I guess discussing it with mainly people in the biomechanics area, I do find those conversations challenging, potentially because I'm not really, I wouldn't say I'm definitely not at the forefront of changes that are happening in that space. So potentially maybe they can see the value of the mismatch in the contrast between classical mechanics, but potentially there is a lot more going on these days, which that they always seem to have a response to, which is a tough conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, in Tai Chi, there's a saying about how the E leads the Chi and the Chi leads the body. The intending mind leads the Chi, the energy, and the energy leads the body. And that I was reminded of that when I was seeing your chart on the different constraints, structural versus functional. This would be the mind's intention would be on the functional side as opposed to the structural side.
Yes, yeah.
Yes. And then the structural side would be how large, how small is this person?
Roughly, but I would say that the functional side, depending on what type of an intention or focus of attention you are adopting, then that will have structural changes. So in Wing Chun, we have this words like saying, like raise up, feng song, let go. And those things create, even though they're changing the way that you are, your intentions or focus of attention, it would be a way to describe that, I would think. But doing so has structural changes in, I would say, muscle tone, which we'll have fun of exploring in the future studies. But yeah, those two are linked. Yeah.
And we do them all the time, right? I mean, if I'm gonna try pushing a car, I do one thing with my body. If I want to be pretending to faint, I would do something else, and my intention completely changes what's going on with my structure.
Yeah, and I find that's interesting, coaching or when I'm receiving some advice from an instructor, and maybe they're pushing, just the change in maybe I'm stuck inside, I'm trying to feel what's going on, or I'm sort of too internalized. But then if maybe my instructor becomes aware of that, he might just said, whatever, project out, focus over there. And then suddenly that change has created a situation where I can now more effortlessly deal with an increased amount of force, or turn it away, or whatever it is. So yeah, it's just those minor changes that can have potentially bigger difference in that moment of time. And over a period of time, I guess that would be a potential explanation of continual adaptation and skill improvement.
Right, which is your big question, right? How difficult would it be for you to bring up a particular slide? You have the slide of the guys pushing against each other.
I could reshare it, I guess.
Yeah, if you could,
Yeah.
if you could post that, because I want to, Steve and I were discussing this concept earlier, or
Which
we're kind of in the middle of one of those where you've got, yeah, that one.
oh,
Oops.
this one?
No, the
Oh,
one before it. The one with
Individual
the two
constraints can
different
be subdivided into two
people
categories.
pushing.
one?
That one.
One situation I was
Oh,
initially setting out
I'll
to
try to put
explain
Pause
I don't
it
know how to
was an
or
example similar to what is depicted.
there we oh, you can't.
I don't know how to pause it.
There we go.
Okay.
So this is your great mystery, right? If you've got two people of the same size pushing against each other, you can understand how there would be how neither could win, right? It would be a fair fight, as they say. And then, but then you've got a situation where you've got these really big guys who are pushing on a relatively small person. And that relatively small person is able to resist the push. And what's going on there? How is that happening? Is that a fair representation of the question?
Yeah, that's definitely one of the questions.
Yeah. And so yeah, so Steve and I have been kind of in a discussion about this with this idea of balanced and unbalanced forces, right? So if the forces are balanced, you've got 50 pounds pushing one way and then 50 pounds pushing the other, nothing's going to move. But then if one has more force than the other, then the smaller one will have to move. And then when we look at these people working with each other, is the smaller one doesn't have to move. What's going on there, right? I mean, that's part of the mystery, right?
Yeah.
And so what I want to know from you, I mean, I have my own thoughts about what's happening and how it's happening and why it's happening. What are your thoughts about how it's possible from what you've seen so far?
Yeah, so these pictures are probably not the best representation of what I'm trying to talk about,
Yeah,
but
and go ahead, and I just wanted that up for a second. You can get rid of them.
yeah, sure. Well, okay, if I got a sec, I'm just going to flick back to quickly looking at a video. So this is
Yes.
Grandmaster Choi Chung Ting. And if we look at not only what the effect on the training partner's effect is on their body, but also if you have a look on the changes in the master's body, what's going on there. And does it seem like there's any much localized muscular tension there? And I guess it's one of those things. If you can have a chance to feel what's going on, it makes a difference as well. But my guess at what's happening, it would be that their state of mind and body, that there's a saying, it's not about the position, it's about the condition. It's not about the shape, it's about the state. And so that condition or that state allows for their intention to be able to deal with the incoming force in a relatively effortless way, but also in a way which still allows them to maintain freedom of movement. And yeah, so what's happening with the force, as we saw with actually this slide, there is an example. If anyone is interested, go check out that video and read the sort of content on that initial slide, where in this example, the master is talking about that this actual demonstration is only good for demonstration purposes. And in fact, he would, it would be represent a higher level of skill to sort of not take on that person's force, but to sort of, I know I use my auxetic expansion figure within that within the article. That's what it feels like to me. When I push on them, it feels like, and they do that thing, it feels like I'm bouncing away or I'm pushing myself away. So I haven't tested that, but that's kind of my guess, or that's my feeling of what it feels like.
Right. So in my experience of this kind of thing, it's that somebody's pushing on you and you're transferring their push to ground. So they may as well be pushing on a basketball. If you push on a basketball, you can push as hard as you want. The basketball doesn't care where the force gets increased. And I think your force plate study is showing that is in the relationship between the foot and the ground. But the practitioner who's taking that force in and managing it, I'm seeing the word bracing in the that Joe's putting in the chat. And I just want to say from my experience, and so Daniel, you're gonna have to tell us about yours. If I brace and I use I activate my muscles, I'm unable to withstand that kind of incoming force. If I relax, but I sort of try to use my intention to cultivate, being a whole body distributed, whole body connected, a coherence in the system and integration so that whatever comes in gets distributed everywhere. The way it seems to be happening is the force comes in, it's distributed everywhere. It collects again at the bottom of my feet where my feet meet the ground. So that's my physical sense of it and why I'm able to do that. If the person pushes very slowly, in other words, we do this exercise in a very, incremental way. And I've been able to teach just about everyone to do it. What's been your experience working with people with this kind of exercise?
Yeah, I guess the word relaxation, the instruction to relax. I remember when I first started, that was it's still a common thing, but I guess my interpretation was like, what do you mean relax? If I relax, I can't take any force. But that's that idea of floppy, relaxed, like collapsible kind of relaxation where you can't actually take any incoming force. Your only option would be to try and roll it off or redirect it. But then if I'm not gonna, if I relax and that happens, then what's my other option? Then that would be to rigidly brace and sort of hunker down, localized muscular pushing type of effort. And that would be better than the other way, unless you are good at sort of redirecting. But that's only good for force coming in a straight line. If there was incoming force being pushed in and I use that bracing, locking kind of approach, and then someone takes me across that angle, I can't do two things at once. And also with that metastability example, I find this is a good one. So if you push towards your training partner and don't tell them what you're going to ask them to do after that, but then ask them while you're pushing to move their arm like this. Because quite often if they're using that pushing bracing thing and then they don't know, but then they find out they got to move their arm like that, they will have to switch off what they're doing to try and be able to free themselves off to do that. And then that force will end up collapsing them, or they'll get stuck and won't be able to move. So you want a force management system where you're able to deal with that, but still maintain freedom of movement. And yeah, so rigidly bracing, I guess people have different ways of understanding what they're doing with that. But yeah, I would equate bracing to rigidity and just differentiate relaxation from, it's not floppy relaxation, it's open expansion kind of
Yeah, I mean, we're always looking for the words, right? Integrated, distributed forces, distributed effort, kind of like the boat where everybody's rowing at the same time. You've got a ton of people rowing and nobody has to do too much, as opposed to if it's not coordinated, one person, there might not be a timing thing and there might be different people using different amounts of energy. So that's one of the ways I've talked about it. Chris is asking, how would you now define relax? And I think you've started to do some of that.
Yeah, and
But in Wing Chun, they don't use the term relax. They use something else. Is it right?
no, some instructors use the word relax, although I think the Chinese word might be a related Chinese instruction might be feng song, which kind of probably more means like let go, kind of.
Yes.
But that might be more like mental letting go as well as the physical letting go. But I know within those synergetics approaches, one word was entrapment. But basically in Wing Chun, we've got this idea of Tai Gong, which is kind of internal connection, raising up and letting go. It's not like a 1, 2, 3. It's not like a flow. It's not like a segmental thing. It's like on-off switch. So you do those things, and then you get that sort of relaxed flow and expansion out. And then what you need to do to maintain that, that should be I might say effortless, but like kind of an effortless approach. It's not something that you need to hold on to. It's something that's on, and then you can direct your intention to what you want to do. Or so I would probably use those words to try and describe how I'm trying to get that sort of relaxed flow. Would be internal connection, drawing up, raising up to the top of the spine, and that through that sort of feeds into the rest of the system as a guidance. Like if I'm, that central part's doing that, so everything else can join in, sort of, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And so my Chinese is non-existent, but yeah, Marco Otta is putting in the word sung, and it gets spelled in English different ways. And that's the sung that's in the phrase you were saying, the let go phrase.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not very good with my Chinese either, but yeah, let go would be feng song, if
Yes.
that's right.
Yes, yes. So yeah, and the other thing is that when I've been in that situation and there's somebody, big, and they're pushing on me like that, if I've got myself integrated, not only can I transfer the push to ground, I can also wiggle, 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 everything kind of in between that point of contact and my feet I can reconfigure while I'm doing that transfer, which to me is more evidence on that, on how cultivating the principles we learn when we study biotensegri and trying to figure out how to manifest them physically, that reconfigurability works as well. Have you found this to be the case?
Yes, and I find that at a more lower level of skill would be to, there's an incoming force to sort of redirect around that, or sort of cut off on a different angle, so it's easier to move. But at a higher level of skill, just moving straight through, it's not going to be a linear thing, because you are sort of the closed kinematic chains working, but at the same time, incoming force from this direction, and I'm not going to try to run away or get away from that. Just straight through would be able to represent a higher level of skill. But then the ability to also, as I mentioned before, maintain freedom of movement at will, in despite of the incoming force.
And as you say, these are exercises for training to get this sense of this sense of that. Nobody's proposing that in any actual altercation, which I hope to never actually be in a real fight, that somebody would stand there and just try to resist whatever came in. That's not the purpose of the exercise.
No, it's just a force generation type of an exercise, and that's only one movement of the first form in Wing Chun, just extending your arm forward. And then you got back, you got out, you got down, you got around, and that's only the first form. There's more than that as well, but then you got more complex movements where you got to step and pivot in the second form, for example, or the third form where you start turning your shoulder past your hip line, so more like a spiraling action with. There's plenty to go with.
Yeah,
And
always more to study. Bottomless pit, just like with biotensegrity.
yeah.
So you mentioned synergetics, and can you talk about that a little bit? Because Herman Haken's synergetics seems to be a completely different thing from Buckminster Fuller's synergetics. Is it influenced by, is there any relationship?
Well, that was one of the things that came up within the peer review process that, where's your inclusion of Haken's synergetics? And so that's how it sort of ended up filtering through. I'm not too familiar with Buckminster Fuller's, what his work on synergetics were, but for me, in terms of from a coaching perspective, all those sort of key terms are a good starting point to be able to know the sort of things that you have to play with in a way to help someone improve their performance. And I know we keep relating back to, I keep relating back to this example, but for a coach to be able to help someone who's just starting out, I don't want to push so hard or so fast in a way where it causes an instability and for them to resort to an inferior force management system, more reflective of a lever system or frozen degrees of freedom, because then they're just developing bad habits and they're training in the wrong way. So I want to apply the force in a way at a certain contact. So the easiest way would probably be on the elbow and pushing lightly towards their center. And then once the coach or myself I can feel them sort of starting to lock up or push or tense. Maybe you can hold that there, try get them to reintegrate and to see, okay, now I can push harder again, right? Good. And that way. So all those ideas, even though it's just the Kung Fu practice coaching exercise, it's just the way they do it, regardless of the synergetics concepts. But I definitely see how they relate and how it can be useful for improved understanding.
Yeah, so that's important. If you go to Wikipedia and you put in synergetics, you'll get the two of them,
Right.
Haken's and Fuller's, and you kind of wonder why somebody. Well, I think Haken came later, so I'm not sure why he used that term. But anyway, just so that people know, here we are. We're studying biotensegrity. We're bumping into these other fields, and sometimes you can have two completely different sort of areas of study that have exactly the same name. So it becomes important to be able to verbally articulate those distinctions.
Yeah, no, there's plenty of those that I came across along the way.
Yeah, yeah. So we're about an hour in, and I would encourage people who have questions to use the raise hands, and you can come up and ask any questions if you've got them. I really like how you are able to, you've studied biotensegrity long enough that you were able to begin to figure out how to apply it to your work. And then, what's your process in terms of, or what are you looking at going forward in terms of studying biotensegrity or this work that you're doing?
Guess I've got almost a year left as part of my PhD program, and continuing research after that will likely depend on probably funding or, maybe government funding for a research project that I propose to be conducted. And I would like to move towards the musculoskeletal injury prevention and management, or that type of area, or potentially falls and trips type of prevention. But yeah, that's really going to depend if someone thinks this type of research is valuable enough for them to fund it going forwards.
Thank you. Juan, I'm going to bring you up for your question in just a second, so get ready for that. I just want to say, Daniel, you sent me some test results with the pushing with that, with the monitor. Maybe it was with the pressure monitor, and it was divided. Oh, wait a minute. We lost you. Oh, good. Yeah, keep your hand up. Thank you. It keeps you at the top of my list, Juan. Thank you for doing that. Give me just one more second. So Daniel, you sent me these results, and it said something like the push was this percent vertical and this percent horizontal and this percent whatever. How that seems like that has to be a calculation rather than a measurement. In other words, with the force plate, it's a direct how much pressure is on that force plate.
Yeah, so
When software gets involved, human minds get involved. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do, and I'm not sure how I misguided you with that, because that was referring to force plates, not
Oh, that was. So the
yeah.
force plate reading is saying there's this much force coming vertically and this much coming horizontally.
Yeah.
So it's measuring it, or it thinks it's measuring some kind of shear between the foot and the plate itself, the friction. It's
Yeah.
measuring friction, perhaps.
And I'm not sure the technical way to explain it, but within that example where the concrete guy was standing on one foot and we pushed in, the force plate increased by 500 newtons, and roughly 300 of that was in the vertical, and most of the rest was in the forward projection. So if you imagine a sprinter in the sprint blocks, when they push off let's say was on a force plate, they're not going to do a vertical jump. So there is a horizontal component to that, and that's how they're quite expensive, and I guess that's where they become valuable in terms of breaking up that coordinate system into X, Y, Z. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's what it's always in my mind. How much
Talking
of
about,
this
yeah.
is the mechanical, reading, and how much of this is the software programmer putting ideas in about what's happening.
Right.
Anyway, it's an open question. So yeah, Juan, I'm gonna ask you to unmute, and I'm gonna spotlight you.
Yeah, yeah.
If I
Hello,
figure out
can you hear me?
how. Yeah, I'm trying
Yeah,
to
hi.
spotlight you. Hold on.
Okay.
Juan, where are you, please?
Yeah, I'm in Colombia right now. I'm friends with Daniela. I'm
Great.
new here. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I've mainly been working with ecological dynamics, and more specifically in the constraint-led approach. I'm a basketball coach from kids of between 6 and 12 years old. I'm kind of new to biotensegrity, and Daniela has been teaching me a lot. But I think my question is more related to the ecological dynamics side of the research. So the thing is that I've been using it for almost a year, and I have really having great result with the kids. Not only in performance, but also they are really having fun. That I have as the main goal of my teaching. But my real question is that one of the issues that I have found with ecological dynamics is that the benchmark that it shows a non-linear development. Yeah. So as we have uh, various constraints, we cannot measure like we did before as a, for example, a 25-meter dash, and you can time it and you know the results. So when you work in your research, how are you managing the benchmarks that you are using? So yeah, how can you measure your results?
Yeah. And I guess that will be coming with the intervention study. So a little bit more about that. I should have brought it down, but basically that was the gloved let's call it a balloon on the forearm and with a pressure transducer. So when I push, it measures the change in pressure, which by a surface area we can equate to force. And one of the objectives of the intervention will be a number of groups. One of the groups will be let's call it a biotensegrity informed ecological dynamics group, with that sort of Wing Chun Kung Fu sort of training involved within that as well. So how will we measure performance change over time? Can they deal with more incoming force before they collapse? And in terms of efficiency, what are their associated viscoelastic properties and muscle stiffness, and EMG? Because a higher peak in localized EMG activity, for example, maybe result in improved performance, but that's like localized effort. So I reckon a good result for me, I'd be happy with at the end of the intervention if they're able to increase their force that they're able to take, and they're able to do it in a more efficient way.
But
Juan, can I ask, you're talking about a situation where you've got these kids, you're working with them, you've changed what you're doing, you've been doing that for about a year, you're seeing differences, but they're non-linear differences in the kids, right?
I mean, it's more like I'll see them having more fluent interactions in the court. It's not like they are able to do more tricks or something like that, but they are able to get more affordances, so they feel more comfortable in the court. Is more that what I've found. But I had another question that I see that yeah, you're gonna measure them doing the movement, but also one of the big things that the ecological dynamics talk about is the environment. Yeah, is one of the constraints, and it's one of the things that maybe, for example, I've been studying that. I was a big fan of the reaction test with lights, but they are shown to not be representative in the court, because yeah, you learn to react to the lights, but you have balls. Yeah, so when you do the test, it will be a test like in a simulated fight, because yeah, it also I feel it's also important to have that like environment component.
Yeah, well, I guess that would be one area that I haven't explored up to date, so I kind of did a little bit of striking based stuff, I even know it's only striking a target, but now we're working on more continuous contact point interactions. Another area for exploration would be collisions, right? So if you think about, we could do combat sports like striking type of stuff, or you could relate that to collisions more in like rugby league, or I guess NFL kind of collision.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about an optimization of the body as a force management system, then how does it behave within more rapid force and high impact collisions, for example? Yeah, which would be more realistic, I guess, is what you're referring to, right? As well.
Yeah. I want to know what you're doing differently that's making this difference in these kids, where they're now more fluid and they're having more fun.
Okay, well, I've been guiding myself heavily on what Alex Arama have been talking. I don't know if have you heard of him.
Tell us that name again slowly, Alex.
Alex Arama. I have his book right here. So he have these books.
Hold it close to you. Hold it close to you.
Yeah. Okay. Here.
Transforming basketball. Okay, great.
Yeah. And this is a huge CLA approach book, and he explained a little bit of the ecological dynamics.
And we just say CLA is constraints.
Yeah. So what my trainings are based off is just that I put them in as realistic environment as I can. For example, one-on-one situation in basketball where one is the attacker and the other one is the defender, and I constrain them. For example, I constrain the defender so he can't use his hands, so he can just only use his body. So that way, the kid has an opportunity to have a challenge because he has a defender, but also he has an opportunity to look for answers. And I will change these restrictions over time. And also another huge component is that really player focus. So I really have to, as a coach, you have to observe the player and see how they are reacting to their environment, what affordances they're getting, and what affordances I want them to get. So I have to switch my approach, maybe change constraints. One really easy constraint is that they are only using their dominant hand. So one easy constraint is change it so you can only use your non-dominant hand.
Great.
So yeah, that's like the really easy part of that.
And I know that Steve Schafferman's talked about Moshe Feldenkrais teaching and that kind of thing too, where you're saying, okay, you're noticing where you're, well, in this case, you, the coach, are noticing it in your students, but as a person studying with their own movement system, they're noticing their own dominance, their own tendencies, their own affordances. I don't know if they ever use the term over affordances. And so that you introduce the constraints in order to help somebody find new territory. Joe, you have a question. Did you want to jump in? Because Juan Joe is also or has coaching experience. I don't know if you're still there, Joe.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So, as usual on these webinars, I need to digest what I just heard, kind of speak before I could apply it. Because when I think of this, again, I keep thinking of when I hear Dan speak about I keep thinking it as stiffness in my world, or as bracing. I get where he may look at it as a little bit different. And and that, to me, when you talk about those qualities, they're very task dependent. For instance, I'm thinking, like, in my head, I'm thinking, okay, when I talk about these qualities that Dan's talking about, they could happen in baseball, for instance, with a batter. Okay, the ball's coming in, it's coming in all kinds of different speeds, and it's going to be breaking at different angles and that type of thing, and trying to deceive the batter. Yet the batter has to adapt, and that bat has to reach the ball at the right period of time. I was also thinking of of how it could be applied in football, because a big problem with of course, is concussions in football, and we all know that especially neck stiffness has a lot to do, a big part to play in concussion prevention. But all the research shows that stiffness has to kind of be built into the system. In other words, when the player gets hit, that tensegrity, I guess, if you want to call it that, already has to be there. Has to be in place. Yeah. I have to go back, and I gotta, like, my head's spinning right now. I got to think about what I just heard. I'd like Dan maybe to comment on those situations that I deal with. But also I'm wondering and I put a question. So how much of this, and again, I'm probably using the wrong word, this stiffness or resistance that he's talking about, is due to proprioception, and how much is due to just the auxeticity created, by biotensegrity, that automatically does that sort of without much help from the proprioceptive system. So sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess that's something I'm looking forward to spending some time with the myoton unit to get a better understanding of stiffness and using that alongside EMG, because again, I'm not really sure about the answer about this, but just some questions that I have would be, one way to increase localized stiffness would be to contract, get that high spike in EMG activity, you contract the muscle to near a peak, and then that's an indication of increased localized stiffness. But can we do that without that can we increase that level of stiffness without requiring that high level of EMG activity? Yeah, I guess I'm not sure, and then at the same time, for those Kung Fu guys, they seem relatively relaxed. You feel their muscles, but they must have a certain level of stiffness there if that's the thing that's preventing the collapse. So I'm not too
Am I
sure.
using the right terminology first?
So see here,
Of
here,
stiffness.
Stiffness,
I think this is the problem, Joe, right? Because you have the word stiff as it's used like in physics. And then you have the word stiff, like we call a dead body a stiff. You know what I mean? And it's like these are completely different states. And so I can tell you from experience with doing these things, my sense of it is if I'm someone's pushing on me and I get into an active muscular contraction state, then I'm cultivating a resistance. And one of the things we say in Taiji is no resistance and no letting go. So I stay connected, but if I actively try to resist, I've just given the advantage to the other person. They can take advantage of that muscular seizing and throw me right out very quickly. If I can stay sung, or if I can stay integrated, and the way I think of it is, could you do this for an hour and still be comfortable? So if I'm doing something where I'm activating, the muscles and I'm trying to brace against something in an active way, I'm only going to be able to sustain that for a very limited period of time. But if I can get myself in a comfy place where I'm very integrated, I can hang out there. I think of the people who do modeling for artists, okay, and they sometimes have to create a shape, or like modern dancers, they may have to be in a very odd shape, and they may have to be frozen in that shape for a long time. How can you do that? The only way you can do that is to find a sustainable way where you're not straining. It may look like one would have to strain in order to do that. But if you're cultivating unbalanced tensions within the system, this is doing more than that. You're not going to be able to sustain it. And so what you're actively trying to cultivate, and we do this with Qigong, where we'll stand in a certain shape, for an extended period of time. And it's about finding a way to be integrated and relaxed, but full. It's that full empty. Anyway, it's just a different state that you're cultivating for your body. And in Tai Chi, they talk about how in that case, when the force comes in, it gets spiraled through the body. It's not a straight meat.
Also, I've got I should have brought it down with me, but a tensegrity icosahedron, but it's one of those adjustable ones with screws. And I don't know if it's an accurate comparison, but let's say I've got the screws turned down so the thing sort of the strings are loose, there's not much tension through there. Then if I turn them all out, the whole thing expands out, increasing the pre-stress within the system. But I would also just say that's a way of increasing the stiffness, which does not need to be done localized. It can be done sort of in an orthostatic expansion type of a way.
Yeah, so that's a different use of the word stiffness, right? Than if I stiffen a muscle or I stiffen my shoulders. So it's that language thing again. So we've got this great situation here where we've got you three sports coaches together. I keep thinking there might be another thing that you have to ask of each other, but maybe not.
Yeah, I think it just kind of this just kind of gets the whole conversation started, you know, and then the right way to apply it. And I put into, you know, and one of the examples that, you know, that we do, I don't know if you could access it, you might have to have a Google account, but if you look at the exercise, there are two similar to what, you know, to what Dan's talking about, but they're using a stick. And they're both pushing with a stick, and sometimes it's, you know, it's in a coordinated fashion, but you could also do it with your kind of like, you know, very suddenly like alternating that tension, you know, where the other person has to kind of react to what you're doing. So it's, you know, creating that type of that type of environment. And I mentioned proprioceptors because I'm wondering how much of that occurs beyond the limits of the proprioceptive system, and how much of that has to be created by tensegrity, the tensegrity that's already there, that's already in place, right?
Joe, when you say the proprioceptive system, are you talking about the nervous system?
Well, no,
No.
the tension receptors, and, you know, the Golgi and the muscle spindles and
The whole thing. Okay,
and
okay, yeah.
and all that kind of stuff, which we know is, you know, fascia's, you know, of course, is very rich with with tension receptors. But we also know that, again, like again back to baseball, the ball's coming in so quick, it's beyond the limits of the proprioceptive system. Even with Dan, even what you're talking about, even with sprinting, you know, that tension is necessary, right? Because of the system's too floppy, you know, you're gonna lose a lot of that, you know, the force. But then again, if you're too stiff, and that happens, you know, well, I think there's on the internet, you could look at somewhere in the not this Olympics, the prior ones, where the French team won the 4x100 relay. You could actually see like their cheeks flopping because they were going so fast, but at the same time, they're so relaxed. Kind of, you know, to illustrate your
Wonderful.
point.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Marco, you had your hand up. Did you want to ask something?
Yes,
Hold on. All right, hold on. Let me
thank you,
just
Susan.
figure. Hold on just a second. But anyway, thank you, Juan. Thank you, Joe. I'm gonna take you out of the spotlight for a minute and bring in Marco.
Thank
Go
you,
ahead,
Susan.
Marco.
Thank you. I wanted just to add something in support of Dan and Daniel, and also related to what Joe was just saying about proprioception. In regarding in this particular case of Wing Chun, which is at the core of the discussion, starting point, for those also who may not know much about it, basically, as Daniel mentioned before, the first form of Wing Chun, the Siling Tao, is a form which seems to be static in the sense that you don't move around, you stay on the spot. The most of the leg mobility that you are allowed during the study of the form is shifting, moving, opening a little bit the feet and then coming back with the feet to the center. But basically that form, which is at the core of the entire system, is what allows the practitioner to study and activate and feel and proprioceptively feel and activate all the internal lines of tension that the body-mind can create, right? And those internal lines of tensions that little by little got embodied with from the practitioner become a sort of human icosahedron, in other words, right? So you start feeling that the feet are grounded to the ground, are really grounded. You don't have to be tense or put any power, and you have those lines activated, and you understand how they work, and any type of push or tension that comes to you get absorbed somehow and bounced back or deflected in some cases, right? So this is just this came to my mind while I was hearing various points in the discussion, that biotensegrity, if you want to take a cup and you want to develop a biotensegrity something out of it, that has a shape already, and you need to come up with some idea to make it biotensegral, a biotensegral cup, right? But yeah, with the human body, the Chinese tradition, in the particular case of Wing Chun, found a way, and that the Xiunim Tao is particular conducive to embody the biotensegrity system like an ecosage, right? And so it may appear to be static, but there is a lot of things happening in very little movement of the hand or the elbow. And I also watching at that form may not seem to be so much, but when you practice it and you need to move slightly little angle and you feel another type of force being activated by that, then it's totally different story, right? So thank you. I'm very happy to participate to this discussion and to hear Dan bringing this to the core.
That's
Thanks.
great. Marco, when did you start studying Wing Chun?
Quite a few years ago. It's from my young age, from my teenage, right? But discontinuously, but it's still part of my passion for sure and my attention.
And you're one of the few people who's able to pick up a tensegrity while you're talking to us. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure. I know you have all of you have way more models, but I have just those two for now.
Oh, that's great.
I mean, I've done those myself because I can't find those around. So built it with some little sticks and strings anyway, elastic, and they work fantastically.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. Does anyone else have any questions? I don't see any more hands up.
Hold on. Can I ask one more thing? And I hope I'm not.
Yeah, Joe, come on. Hold
Yeah.
on a sec. I'm going to spotlight you if you turn your video on.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Okay, so you hear me now? You can see me?
We're good.
All right, so Dan, I'm going to your article, and I hope I'm not getting off the subject here, but I was wondering if this would be a good time to bring up that concept about muscle slack.
Yep.
That was in the article. So go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess that would be relating to pre-stress as well. So if you have got your pre-stress tuned down, then you need some amount of time to be able to remove that slack from the system before force can be produced. So in sports or activities which require, which only have a short time available required to complete the movement. I think you mentioned baseball hitting before, Joe, right? So if you are using some of that time to be able to take the slack out before you're even starting to produce force to move, then that's a waste of time and might potentially make the difference between you hitting the ball or getting a good shot or not, for example, or linking back to my example, if I'm not in if I haven't got the muscle slack removed from the system, then I get that collapse before I can respond. Whereas if it's already on, I don't have that sort of lag. And then you can utilize that time to produce more force more effectively.
Okay, so is that slack we're talking about? Is it metaphorical or is it mechanical? It's so is that particular muscle actually loose and has to, like a rope, has to be straightened before it can be used, or are you speaking just creating that tension?
Rob Gray's got a couple of books. He's discussed it in his books. I know Franz Bosch also discusses this concept. I think if you type in something like collagen slack or collagen crimp into a Google search, you will find pictures of like a wavy pattern of a crimp pattern, which when the stress is taken out, then it hits that straight line, and then force can be pulled from the tentative state, creating the movement. So as far as I'm aware, it's not a metaphorical thing. It's an actual thing that can be measured.
So this was such a good question from Joe that came up when the paper was first published, and it sent me down a really interesting rabbit hole that I'm not at the bottom of yet. The word slack and its use goes back. I think I found it going back like 100 years in the literature. And I think it's kind of like when we were talking about relax earlier, right? Or stiffness earlier. We were talking about these words get used in different ways for different things. So in terms of the mechanical, if you think about, okay, I'm like falling asleep and then there's a knock at the door, and all of a sudden I'm like that. Now, there's been some sort of change in the system we perceive mechanically, right? But internally, we have kinematic indeterminacy, we theorize, right? In that you really can't measure what's going on under the skin in every single place, at every single scale level, at every single moment. That becomes impossible. But we can perceive a change in our structure. So now that's going to be structural and physical. However, even if I'm asleep or completely relaxed, or as Steve has talked about, under anesthesia for an operation, if you go to cut the skin will pull apart. We are tensioned systems all the way through, right? We are tensioned systems, and that level of tension never goes to zero if you're alive, right? It may go to a low level, but it is a distributed tension throughout all scale levels of the system. And my understanding looking back, so then I followed these Franz Bosch papers. Steve, I'm going to spotlight you because I know you're going to want to jump in here. So when I looked at this Franz Bosch paper, okay, one of them where they're talking about the gastrocnemius muscle, okay, and they've got somebody under an MRI. It would be fun to hear Brad Fullerton's take on this too, because he does a lot of work with MRI. And they see the individual muscle bundles, and they see them not all kicking in simultaneously. They see some starting to move before others, and they interpret that as being like having a rope where you have to first take the slack out of the rope, and that's what's going on, that when they see one muscle spindle group moving but others not, that rather than that being a strategy of the evolutionarily evolved system where things engage at different times at different levels for different reasons. Okay? Where instead of that, you have this imagined thing that the muscle's like this, then you have to get it to that, and then you can activate the muscle. I think that's a mechanical misreading of the system and of the slack metaphor. I'm going to turn it over to you, Steve.
Okay, wait, let me get out of where I'm playing around here. As a surgeon, when I was dealing with fractures, you would see an overlap of the fracture so that there's clearly muscle pulling the bones together, even under deep anesthesia. Now, when you're setting the bone under anesthesia and the anesthesiologist is the other end, he doesn't want the person too asleep because he wants them to breathe if possible, so he doesn't have to work. So he doesn't give them complete relaxation. And you're trying to get these ends of the bone to match up, and you say, will you get this person more relaxed? And they start pouring more anesthesia in them, and they curarize them, and they get them paralyzed. And you're still pulling, you keep telling this guy, pull more curare in. There is always tension in that system. Never is it slack. Now, you have ready, get set, go, which means when you say get set, you bring your level of tension up to an appropriate level for the activity you anticipate. But even at the lower level, you are still tense depending on what your needs are at that instant. So that when you are standing, a level of tension in your system that maintains you standing, because otherwise you would fall over if those muscles were slack. You can never get them slack. If you are not dead, there's muscle tension. It's that simple. So
And that's at every scale level of the system.
every
Not just
scale level.
muscles, they're not just muscle tension. There is systemic tension.
We're talking about all
at all
fats, all
levels of the
collagen is under tension.
Right. So
All
is it under high tension or lower tension? But it's never like this.
Yeah,
That is
it's never slack. Now,
yeah.
you're right. If somebody is not ready for being hit, they are at a different tension level. So when somebody hits them and they get a sucker punch, it's different than when you are just, you're ready for the punch and the fight or whatever's going on. So it's the difference. I mean, it's why Houdini got killed, for instance, when he got his stomach punched and wasn't ready for it. They ruptured his spleen or something. So whatever that was, the point is it's a tone level that you set when you say ready, get set, but you never completely lose tension. It's always appropriate for what you're doing at the time and getting set for it. Yeah. And that goes in the bone too. The bone is under, within the bone, there's tension within the bone, but when the muscles are pulling on it, sort of the bone is under compression, but that's from the tension of the surrounding system. So the bones are always under this pressure. And that's why I said you can never get the system completely relaxed.
Yeah. And so thank you, Steve. And so when you look at that Van Horen article, it's when I'm thinking of that, Joe, that's the one with the gastrocnemius muscle and all of that, right? Where they're saying that that's kicking in later than, when we dorsiflex the foot, that's what they're looking at. That's the action they're measuring. This kicks in before this kicks in. And they're interpreting that. And the way they're interpreting that, they're using this word slack, which again, I went back in the literature and I saw people using it back, like talking about the muscles and different parts of the system going back 100 years. They're trying to find the language to talk about what they're seeing. But if you then take that metaphor and you run too far down the road with it, which is what Rob Gray, if you're out there and you hear this, I'm very, very interested in getting into the discussion further with you and happy to, but nothing's ever like this. However, I can make my body more soupy right now, right? Again, you think of a modern dancer kind of thing. You can do all kinds of things. Or a kid that doesn't want to be picked up, they'll just, and they'll make themselves seem heavier, right? It's because of what they're able to do with their system. We have ranges within the system of configuration. Go ahead, Joe. Sorry.
Yeah, I think I think Dan though is speaking, not of tension, but of actual mechanical length. And I think if I understand, like the way Bosch describes it, well, that is the way he described it because I've been at a lot of his workshops before. He actually talks about the muscle being physically, mechanically slack and has to be straightened before it could be maximally effective and prevent things like ACL tears, in soccer players and that type. That's the way, unless I misunderstand it, but
But
from being
Joe,
in his lectures and hearing it from his mouth.
yeah, but
Except
he
muscles
can't
don't
get
shorten or
inside
lengthen.
the body. He
Yeah.
can't get inside the body and find that.
And muscles don't shorten or lengthen. They expand auxetically or shrink auxetically. So they don't shorten or lengthen. They pretty much stay the same length or get a little bit longer, but they don't shorten or lengthen. Muscles don't act by shortening or lengthening. It doesn't work that way. They are auxetic
It's
and
not
expand
this.
auxetically.
Yeah, it's not this. It's, it's that.
And it's really hard to think of it because it is so different than how we've thought of muscles all along.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because we didn't have the language for it. And again, I found this language going back 100 years. Well, nobody had heard of a tensegrity 100 years ago, right?
Nobody's heard of auxetic 100 years ago.
And so exactly, without the language, we're AUX. Yeah, Joe's got it in there. Thank you. In the chat, AUXETIC. Omnidirectional expansion and condensation. And you'll see that at all scale levels of the system. Are we good?
I don't know if we're good, but like I said, these things I have to hang up, and then I have to kind of like, wow. Now I can pretend I didn't listen to all this and I didn't hear it, or I could take it back in my own world and and look for ways to to apply it. So
yeah, so I'm just going to say again, so I found it back so far, going back like 100 years in the literature. These people are trying to describe what it is they're seeing or feeling or looking at. They're using the word slack because what else do they have? And then one uses it, so the next one uses it, the next one uses it. But then if you take that metaphor and you run too far down the road with it and you think it's like pulling on a rope that has a boat at the other end or whatever, I think you're misusing the metaphor, to my mind.
I think slack doesn't need to equate to no tension in the system, though. Maybe it could mean more like your level of tone is not at your level of pre-stress is not at an optimal threshold or a position relative to the action you're about to perform, and it could be considered it's slack in that sense.
Exactly. The first time I heard the term used with an Aikido guy, and we were doing some partner work and stuff, and he said, your problem is you haven't taken the slack out. What are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about. And basically I was relaxed to the point of being soupy. I didn't have that whole system integration that went from the ground from my feet all the way up to my fingertips and my top of my head, so that when he got any part of me, he got all of me. That's the integration.
And if those muscles are isotonic, they would be.
Steve, are you playing us a loop here?
Sorry, I was putting a loop in. I didn't know I had sound.
That's okay. I think we've got time for another question or two if anyone has one. We want to bear in mind that it's almost 5 a.m. for you, Dan.
It is, yep.
Wow.
Saturday morning.
Dan, thank you. I appreciate
No
it.
problem. No, it's been great.
All right. So if there are no more questions, I'm gonna take the spotlights off. Dan agreed to do our final toast for us. Anyone who wants to jump in with the final toast, you can turn your camera on. You can turn your mic on.
Yeah, so here's Saturday morning. I guess for you all, a lot will be Friday. So happy weekend.
Cheers.
Yes.
Cheers.
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 So much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
I will take us off of YouTube now. Stick around if you want for another few minutes. Let's
Susan,
see.
can I give a plug for Mike?
Oh, please.
So one of our members, Mike Olian, has developed a tensegrity kit that is
Hold on. I'm gonna spotlight you, Chris. This is really good stuff. Spotlight for everyone.
So one of our members, Mike Olian, he's a puppeteer and he's developed a new tensegrity kit. So this is one and it's the fastest, easiest to take apart and put together of anything I've used so far. So I just want to give a plug. If you look in our newsletter, there's information there about his upcoming workshop, isn't there, Susan?
Yeah, and there will be in the next newsletters as well, that link. It's in May. And yeah, what I want you to do, Chris, is hold up your little guy and then hold it down at the hips a little lower. Put your hands a little lower on the system.
Let me do this so it's against me instead of.
Yeah, but put your hands lower down in the system, like on the top of the legs kind of thing.
Okay.
And then flick the hips.
Yeah, so I can walk him from the legs. And it's one thing, but then I kind of like to do this. You can stick your fingers right inside and then get the spinal engine working.
Look at that, guys.
So the really neat thing about it is that, I mean, you take it, he's good, and this is patent pending, but
yes,
you can take it apart so quickly and adjust it and, make new shapes and configurations. Like that's that. Whoops. If you do register, I bought the middle-sized kit and that gives me enough to do both of these. But I know, Susan, you were talking about getting the big kit, and as usual,
I have ordered the largest kit possible. And in my mind, I'm already thinking that he needed to make us another one that was even larger. I think mine's like 96 pieces. Particularly if you're not in the United States, you'd want to register pretty soon because he's going to ship the kits to you. Can you put the link in?
I will find it and put it in.
All right. And speaking of links, Daniel, you talked about a YouTube video that somebody could find. And I wasn't able to find it. Maybe I didn't have the search terms. So I don't know if you can put that in the chat as well.
Sure. I'll try it. Just one.
All right, great. I'm going to remove the spotlight. And then Adrian, if you've got a second, you said you're a Tai Chi teacher. And so you can unmute.
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah, hold on a second.
Did you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead. So you said you were a Tai Chi teacher and you talked a lot about martial arts stuff today, so I just thought you might have something to share about it.
No, there was a lot of new words for me. I'm not that kind of science guy, you know. I'm an architect, so this is maybe my way of thinking about tensegrity. Before it was geometric and structures, and when it comes to Tai Chi, I see this, like you know what we are talking about stiffness, and I see pang, you know, this kind of
Yes.
increasing of tension, and I think was one of my first picture. It comes to me to make these analogies and show to other peoples that it's very also nice to build models. So this is also kind of thing which I really appreciate as an architect, to make something physical and explain it to other peoples. Then it's much more worth than words or statistics. And so yeah, this pang or a rollback, you know, with everything is compressed, was
Yeah,
one of my first image.
Pung he's talking about it. We call it in English ward off. It's a shape you make. Yeah.
Yeah. But then then I decided to find some Tai Chi principles, and I came to the 5 Tai Chi principles of Benjamin Lowe, who it seems to me to be a kind of a nice compressed in a way, because there's a lot of Tai Chi principles out in the world. But so he described the 5 principles of relaxation, turning the waist, separate yin and yang, body upright, and beautiful lady's hand. And so I decided just to find similarities in these Tai Chi, in these tensegrity models. And that was a very funny work to me. I'm finished with that and wrote a little bit about that. And it's.
I would love to see what you wrote, Adrian. I would love to see that.
Okay.
I had many opportunities to study with Ben, and yes, his 5 principles were a condensation of what are sometimes translated as Yang Jung Fu's 10 or 12 important points, depending on who did the translation. And that, of course, was a condensation of the wider field of literature in the Tai Chi classics. So I would love to see that.
Yeah, for sure. I can send you a link where it's right now visible, my work. Yeah, I call it an essay. It's not that scientific work, but it's just more about my feelings and what I discovered while I worked with models.
Oh, that's
and
great.
Tai Chi, of course.
Can you put in the chat?
The link?
Yeah, maybe. Thank you. And guys, we're in after party mode. Anybody who wants to take off their turn on their video and turn on their mic and jump in, just chat among ourselves. Alex, how are things going there? Are you still in Florida?
Hi, yeah, still in Miami. Managing situation is interesting down here, to say the least. But yeah, doing well. I've had this question in the back of my mind throughout the whole presentation, which I wasn't able to quite to formulate. So maybe y'all be able to help me at this point. It seemed throughout the talk there's this tension with regards, or actually, Susan, when you talked about this whole intentionality about like the mind creates a space for and then the relaxation or the softness.
A quote from the Tai Chi classics: the directs the chi directs the body. So the intending mind organizes the energy, I would say, and then that manifests in the physical body. That
Yeah, so I have I guess, a little issue with the concept of the intending mind, because from an ecological perspective, my understanding is that it kind of tries to not necessarily remove mental intention, but put it on the backseat to this whole bodily intentionality.
yeah. Think of instead purposeful action. When they talk about purposeful action, in other words, don't use the word brain for mind. Let's start there.
Okay. But
Okay.
then even
Yeah,
the
go
concept
ahead.
of mind, though, isn't that still like a constructing principle, like
See, here's
so
the problem. The problem, Alex, is part of the problem here is that we are translating from the Chinese into English.
right. I
Okay,
agree. I
so
understand that.
yeah, and so the E is different from the heart mind. I'm forgetting the Chinese word. Someone else might know it. Is it Shin? But you know, because you have the heart mind, the belly mind. You have three dantians, three centers in Tai Chi, right? And um and one's in the belly. So there's the belly mind. So there's your maybe enteric nervous system. Or, but again, right, from an ecological perspective, we're talking about the organism interacting with the environment. So this is where different systems have different perspectives and different models. And then you have to say, okay, and maybe using the same word in different ways. We see that too. It gets very confusing. And then it's a matter of how do you get everybody to kind of talk to each other?
No, I totally agree that it's an
Yeah.
issue with language in our Western model, which does, starting from modernity with this whole separation of the mind and the body, that we have this transcendental I that kind of is the ghost or the driver in the machine that is the body. Which what I appreciate about the Asian philosophies is just that they didn't fall into that trap that the West did. However, in how we communicate, like when Juan mentioned about his basketball players, like what he said that kind of had a little contention with, but I understand again, it's the trapping of our language. It's the affordances they are getting, like the players are getting affordances. That kind of gives me this whole framing of like a mind getting affordances versus the more ecological one, that, correct me if I'm wrong, would be the emergences emerge out of the relationship between the organism and the ecology. Is
And
that correct?
Juan, you're welcome to jump in. I mean, from my perspective, and I am only at the very beginning of this journey with ecological psychology, is that the environment provides the affordances, right? Now, I think my body also probably provides affordances, right? If I've got a broken arm, to me, my affordances change, but the strict Gibsonian definition has to do, I think, with environment. So if I was getting my front door repaired and it was off its hinges and it wasn't there, there'd be a very different level of affordances for people to be able to get into my house. That might not be a great example, but
No, you gave a great example because yeah, when we talk about affordances, we are enclosed in three constraints. Yeah, the environmental constraint, individual constraints, and task constraints. Yeah, so yeah, the affordances is what you can do when you are constrained. Yeah, so if you have if you want to achieve a goal, you can use different affordances, and you will move between the constraints that you have. And it is also like you say a broken arm, or even a bad morning is also a constraint. You have to take everything into consideration, also the environment, if it's rainy, if it's sunny, if etc. So yeah, and the task.
So it's a it's a dynamic relational system that's always kind of morphing given the conditions or the constraints. But again, I guess I have an issue with the idea that the environment provides the affordances, because it seems again like it's, or maybe I should better put it as like it's this, the organism structure and potential for action is just as important as what the environment is able to offer. Is that fair? Because I guess my contention is just that one just seems to kind of place that the environment is allowing you, but it's to do things where I'm trying to say is like it's this thing that emerges out of the balance between the organism and the environment.
Yes, the organism is never separate from its environment, right? Nothing has ever evolved independent of its environment. No one has developed independent of their environment. So it's a systems view. Would you say, Juan?
Yeah, absolutely. Is on that track, and also another one that we don't talk a lot is about the task, and it is one of the things that Bernstein found that is with the tools. For example, if you have different tools, you will have a different solution. Yeah. For example, if I'm going to nail a hammer, a nail. And if you don't have a hammer, you will do it differently that with a hammer or with a heavier hammer. So it will change how you respond to the goal. Yeah, because everything is about the goal.
That's that purposeful action.
Yep.
Which even an organism, which every organism will have, even, slime mold, right, will have purposeful action.
I guess there it comes back to the issue, like what is the thing creating that purpose? Because if it's like the mind, I don't know.
No, it can't be the mind.
I agree. I don't like that either.
No. Well, I'm just thinking of the readings in ecological psychology that I've done where they talked about, and there's that great paper. It's something like "What is the nervous system for?" That I would, if you can't find it, let me know. But basically, what they're saying is, if you can find one organism that makes choices, builds a little house for itself, or whatever, does any task, and that organism doesn't have a nervous system, how can you assume when we do a similar thing that it's our nervous system that we're using as the primary driver to do it? Okay, so a slime mold will grow in a dish. Before it hits the end of the dish, it will turn and go in a different direction where it has more room to grow. How does it know? It doesn't have, it's not in physical contact. It doesn't have a nervous system. It can't see it in the way we think of seeing. You see, so there's a bunch of stuff that we don't understand. And there are organisms without nervous systems that, are not even in the animalian world, but in, fungi and whatever, that are making decisions all the time. So we really can't attribute it to brain and nervous system. Damien Kelty Stephen, in one interview, he said he thinks the brain is doing more and less than we think it's doing. And I really like that one. But anybody who wants to jump in. So did we get you closer, Alex?
Yeah.
In a way, I have something in the back of my mind, but it just gets a little bit too out there for me to comfortably say publicly.
Okay.
It's just like, what is the thing perceiving? Yeah, what is the thing perceiving? Because if it's not the mind, right, then it kind of pushes us to like, is the world the thing that's perceiving? And actually, I'll ground this in a scholar that's way beyond my level, which is one of my heroes, is Merleau-Ponty in his work, where he started off with the Gestalt psychologist, and he saw the limitations of that model in psychology. And then he moved on. I think he kind of, before Gibson, developed ecological psychology. And shortly before he
And for
died,
those of you who don't know you, Alex, you're coming at this from a philosophical perspective as well, correct?
right, yes. And even within the philosophical tradition, I'm kind of an outlier because I'm more of a phenomenologist, which breaks away from the lineage that started with Descartes and that whole mind-body separation. Phenomenology emerged in Husserl right before World War I or around that time. I'm sorry, I'm going way off track. You brought up philosophy, and I took it way more than.
That's okay. You're gonna have to put some of these names in the chat when you get a chance. Okay, but go ahead.
I'll just focus it back to Merleau-Ponty, who came from that phenomenological lineage, and his whole thing towards the later of life was just that the world is a thing that's perceiving. It's not the mind. It's just kind of like we're kind of a reflection of that. And again, it gets weird, right? That's why a lot of his work isn't really talked about. But if we start to kind of ask these questions, like what is the thing perceiving? Like the slime mold doesn't have a nervous system, so it doesn't seem like nervous system is a necessary condition for perception alone. We need something else. Then things start to get weird. But it's exciting times for what we're going to figure out, hopefully. And I do think I still find it so fascinating that this biotensegrity or tensegrity principles kind of really align well with that field. So again, exciting times.
Wow, that's great. And I would encourage everyone to look at the work of Michael Levin, who puts a ton of stuff up on YouTube. But he's the one who's worked with planaria, and just one small thing they've done is they'll teach the planaria to, where to find food, and then they'll cut the planaria up into lots of little pieces. And then planaria have the ability to, any piece, a tail piece, center of the body piece, will eventually grow into completely new organism. And once that new planaria develops a brain, then it's able to find the food, even if it developed from the tail piece. Okay? So what's going on? Where is information being carried? Is looking at information being carried within the electrical system of the organism, for example. I mean, they're trying to figure out where is information, memory being stored, being propagated. Do you see? So there's a lot of stuff that we don't understand. And how would this conversation change in 10 years?
Exciting.
So yeah, exciting times. I agree with you on that. All right, everyone, we've been here over 2 hours. It's after 5 a.m. for Dan now. He's probably getting ready for the girls will be waking up soon.
Yeah, they got a big day of gymnastics today, so they'll be keen to be getting up in another hour or so.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. It's been a real treat today.
It's been an absolute delight. Thank you all.